we have here with us today. Welcome to this discussion on Madam Secretary General, words that I hope we will soon hear multiple times every day. Today also is the launch of the 1 for 8 billion campaign. You have a little QR code here to tell you more about it. I'm very grateful to the Baha'i international community for hosting us, to the 1 for 8 billion steering committee, Civicus, Plataformas, CIPO, Southern Voice, Women SG, and of course our colleagues from UNA UK for organizing this and for letting me moderate today. We have a wonderful panel. These women do not need an introduction, but I will introduce them briefly anyway, because it's fantastic to hear and celebrate their achievements. But first, just a few words about the campaign. So some of you, I think, looking around the room, may remember the first iteration of this campaign, which was launched 10 years ago, the 1 for 7 billion campaign. And I can tell you nothing makes me feel younger than realizing that 1 billion people have been born since we last worked on this. So back then, I think it was quite astounding that the UN seemed to have fewer rules for appointing the Secretary General than it did for appointing interns. There was no timeline, no formal criteria, no official list of candidates, no opportunities to engage with them. Just this one brief line in the charter. The appointment is made by the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the Security Council. And the resolution passed way back in 1946, saying maybe it's better for the Council just to put forward one candidate for the General Assembly to effectively rubber stamp. What did that mean in practice? In practice, it meant the appointment has remained in the iron grip of the Council's 5 permanent members. Sometimes in the past, even the elected members of the Council were left in the dark. And our campaign believed, quite simply, that a role that is meant to serve all UN member states and all the world's people shouldn't be decided by the whims and pressures of the P5. We worked closely with states, with the President of the General Assembly at the time, with civil society, the media, and of course with permanent members of the Council, to try and put in place a process that would give the whole UN membership and the public a chance to, well, just know who the candidates are, to hear their vision for the organization and to engage with them. We also called for states to nominate women. Over half the candidates in 2016 were, and we are privileged to have 2 of them with us today. As I wrote in Past Blue this morning, our campaign did not win on all fronts. The UN's glass ceiling is still there. Civil society participation in the formal process was tokenistic. And there wasn't a proper debate on issues like a single longer term for Secretaries General, which could reduce the pressures and compromises of re-election. But we had an appointment that did not take place in the shadows. The public dialogues with candidates were seen, even by some of the P5 members, to have shaped the outcome in some way. Civil society and journalists found informal ways, as we do, to quiz candidates and scrutinize their records. And the fact that there was greater transparency and involvement by the whole UN membership did create some pressure on the P5. And now we're going to do it all again, because we have no illusions that the process remains highly politicized, because we know that we need to start agitating now, 2 years before the appointment is due and 1 year before the process really needs to start, to ensure that what was achieved last time is a floor, not a ceiling. And because after almost 80 years, we still have not had Madam Secretary General. That's enough for me. Let me briefly introduce our panel. We have Her Excellency Ambassador Maritza Chan Valverde, the first female permanent representative of Costa Rica to the UN, a longtime diplomat and champion of issues from disarmament, environment, gender, and UN reform. Thank you so much for flying the flag on the senior appointments front for so many years. We have Her Excellency Helen Clark, former Prime Minister of New Zealand, former head of the UN Development Programme, co-chair of the WHO Panel for Pandemic Preparedness, member of the Elders, and one of the former candidates who's lived to tell the tale. Her Excellency Susana Malcorra, founder and president of the group of women leaders, Voices for Change and Inclusion, former Foreign Minister of Argentina, former Chef de Cabinet to Ban Ki-moon, also a former candidate, and she may not like me saying this, but I think one of the best advocates and campaigners we have at the moment in the UN sphere, with brilliant campaigns that I hope she will talk about on Madam Secretary General and rotation for equality. And finally, can't say Her Excellency just yet, but her expertise, Shamala Kanaya Thompson, the soon-to-be Executive Director of the fantastic and much-needed Security Council report, a long-time Security Council whisperer, helping those of us inside and outside of the UN just to figure out what on earth is going on. So let me start then with first round of questions, and I hope it's okay. I'm going to be super informal and call everyone by their first name. Maritza, let me turn to you first. So we in civil society, we do have a role to play, but this is an appointment that is made by states, by the General Assembly. So can I ask you to unpack a little for us what's been going on in relation to the appointment process in the Pact for the Future, which is running into a bit of trouble? And why do you think these appointments, senior appointments, Secretary General appointments, really matter in the context of the Summit of the Future?
Thank you very much for inviting me here today. Since 2013, when ACT was created in the aftermath of the Small Five, Costa Rica has led the selection and appointment of the Secretary General. And we have done that coherently and gratefully. I was able to be part of this process in the inception, since I was the expert who was in the room when, for the first time, the resolution on the revitalization of the General Assembly introduced for the first time the concept of women. It was at the Croatian mission back in 2014 that for the first time in that tiny room, we were able to reach an agreement with the permanent members so we can have that goal. But that goal has not been enough. We have streamlined the process. It's even better. We now have a joint letter that will trigger the process. We have the candidates, two of them are here with us today to present their vision statements and interactions, even a town hall meeting. In the Path of the Future negotiations, the leadership of ACT was key. And let me state that the heart of this process remains at the ad hoc working group on revitalization of the General Assembly. If there's something that we must get right, is to actively participate in the ad hoc working group debates. And this session will be discussing the resolution that will also continue to discuss the selection and appointment process of the Secretary General. So please don't regret, just don't say that, oh, we need to change, be part of the change. As I said, the ad hoc working group on the revitalization of the General Assembly is key. And that small group of diplomats are the ones who pushed the negotiation of the Pact of the Future when it came to acknowledging the fact that there has never been a Secretary General, a female Secretary General. The language in the Pact is critical, but it's not ambitious enough. We didn't want a verbatim of what was said in the resolution of 2021. We wanted the organization at the level of head of states to make gender balance a principle, to recognize that we need to break an 80-year cycle that has created systematic exclusion of women. And this is not an accident, it is intentional. So our efforts to ensure that Madam Secretary General will be in office by January 2027 must be intentional as well. This is more than symbolism. Representation matters. When women lead, we refine boundaries, set new standards, and inspire inclusive transformational changes that benefit all. The failure of endorsing this campaign to select a female Secretary General put us, member states, imprisons member states in obsolete agendas. We need to aim higher and demand more. So let me finish with saying that process matters. We must continue to push for the list of candidates for the Security Council, the call to make sure that a female will get to the 30th floor of this organization. And this only happens at the ad hoc working group. I will continue to say that the GA has power, and small states have proven key in the negotiation of these of the appointment and selection appointment of the SG. Small states have reached always for equity and for power. And we have the diplomatic capital to continue pushing for a more inclusive. The GA and the Security Council must work together. We can take measures as the General Assembly, like asserting ourselves as continue requesting short list from the Security Council to ensure a more transparent process. We can also, with just 1/3 of the states, could refuse to accept a male candidate, applying pressure to the Security Council. But we can also work with the Security Council, especially with the whole DP10 and P5. So we can have champions within the Security Council itself, because we need 9 concurrent votes to select the Secretary General. So it's not a matter of 5, it's a matter of, 9. So if we work with E10 and have champions among the P5, maybe this time, hopefully, no, this time we must see a female at the helm of the UN. I thank you.
Thank you so much. I think there was a real reminder of how important ACT as a cross-regional grouping is, how important the role of smaller states really is. And I was going to ask you a follow-up, you may have answered it already, but really about how the General Assembly can assert its role, because this is about the power of the General Assembly. This is an appointment made by the General Assembly. Do you think there would be willingness to play that insider role where you're kind of working with members of the council, but do you really think there would be willingness to also say, we won't accept, we will reject the candidate who's
well, that's why we're launching the campaign today. 2 years before the date, I think that we have 2 years to convince those who need convincing, to assert those who are already you speak about a woman, and I've been in the negotiations of the ACO working group, the list is endless. Competence, the capacity, the leadership is clear. There are hundreds, thousands of women out there who can do the role. We just need this selection to be intentional and thus change the narrative of 80 years of uninterrupted male leadership.
And that's a good learning point for our campaign. We've moved away from the language of merit-based and also moved away from just saying nominate women. I mean, that's great. We had lots of wonderful women nominated last, and actually, let's actually appoint one this time.
Yeah.
And I'm going to turn to one of them now, Helen. I want to talk about a slightly different set of issues with you. I'm thinking about all the issues that you and the elders have been very vocal about in recent weeks. Sudan, Ukraine, Venezuela, the climate and nature crisis, the alarming situation in the Middle East. Given all of this, I suppose some would say, kind of, why are we focusing on the Secretary General selection process? Why is the Secretary General role so important against this background?
Well, it is the world's top diplomatic role, and no woman's ever held it. It'll be 80 years, and is the 10th going to be a man again. If it is, I think women be likely to turn their back on the UN more. I mean, actually, it would be key to the revitalisation of the UN to have a woman Secretary General. It would create interest in the organisation and institution. You look at how, particularly with some of the younger women leaders who've come into positions of national leadership, how it's excited everybody. In my country, has inspirational young woman leader in Jacinda. She got known around the world from a tiny country. Imagine the impact that a woman SG can have. And that then becomes the basis for your soft power, that you have reached. You're talking to the people, to audiences who haven't been connecting with the UN before. So I think we should see it as part of the revitalisation of the UN and of ideally bringing a different touch to the way in which the UN can lead on some of these big and very, very challenging issues. You know, I think the leadership on climate has continued to be strong, but the UN is no longer seen as a central player in resolution of key conflicts around our world. It doesn't have a place on Ukraine, Russia, except for negotiating a grain agreement, or as that is. It clearly has been pushed to the fringe on Gaza, Israel, the long-term resolution of that dispute. Where is it in Sudan? You know, the proxies all played out there. Where is it on Myanmar? Where is it on? It's on a long list. So, you know, perhaps a woman, and it may well be someone who comes from the ranks of women's senior diplomats. And I think of, for example, the Latin American and Caribbean region, whose turn it really is. No Secretary General since Javier Pérez de Cuellar. You've got to be my age really to remember that. It's a long time ago. Out of the ranks of the Latin American women, there's just so many who've been at foreign ministers, senior diplomatic roles, including here at the UN. I have no doubt you could find a fine person. In fact, we could name quite a lot of them who could do the job. So I think someone with that kind of background, bringing an interest in women, peace and security, that would be a refreshing way to reframe some of the things that need to be done on peace and security agenda as well. I think it could be quite transformational. If I could pick up on a couple of points our colleague from Costa Rica made, and thank you for your leadership on it. My hope would be that going into the next campaign, the group of broadly, shall we say, friends of the election of a woman SG stay the course. They did not last time. They withered away, probably because they saw the writing on the wall and they didn't want to get offside with who eventually got it, but they withered away. But when the campaign started, there was a very active group of member states who were talking this up. Then after a while, we never heard from them again. They just weren't a voice for that. And it was really left to the champions in civil society like Jean, who did a fantastic job out there banging a drum. But we needed the diplomatic corps prepared to take a stand here. I think on the issue of how the process is actually run, I liken what happened last time to a kind of fake transparency, because it was a fake transparency. Yes, you knew who the candidates were. That wasn't always the case in the past. Yes, there was a public sort of hearing in the General Assembly auditorium. Yes, you got an hour to speak to the Security Council, but none of that really mattered. Actually, what did matter was the P5. The 9 didn't matter much either. The 10 didn't matter much. It was who was acceptable to all of the P5, and all were making different judgments. You know, if anyone who's interested, start learning French. That will be a veto. It's, you know, this is not merit we're talking about, this contest, and you're right. Every woman who stands for this will have merit. You know, they will have merit. That's not the issue. The issue is who can find a way of transcending these now even worse divisions, P5 level, to project a future for the UN that could be a unifying vision. But here's another home truth. That is that when you look at the term Secretary General, it's a spectrum, right? The last thing most permanent 5 want is a general. I'd rather prefer a secretary. But any woman who's come through to the position where they can bid for this job, on the quiet side of the spectrum, they've done the hard yards, they've fought for their place. And strength in women is seen very differently from strength in men. It's more terrifying to them. So there's a lot of things to think through with this. Yes, open process by all means, but I think in the diplomatic corps here, there has to be a group that stays the course. There has to be constant cross-regional talking, interaction with capitals, get a debate going. Is it right that the 10th Secretary General be a man? Couldn't a woman be part of the transformation that needs to happen? Those would be my opening thoughts.
No, thanks very much for that. And I think it is sobering what it came down to in the end. And also sad to hear that the active group of member states fell away. Just a quick follow-up to you, just building on your experience of being a candidate, in particular a woman candidate. Well, we can all think of states who are not on board with that. How do we move forward? How do we ensure women are punished for being more on the general side? I mean, is there something to do with collaboration more between the candidates? Is it about that group? I mean, is it all of those things?
In many ways, the candidates ended up holding hands as longer it went on, because, it was clear that something wasn't right here.
Yeah.
It wasn't going right for any of them. So I think you make an important point, though, that there will be men waiting in the wings, waiting for the women to carve each other up.
Yeah.
And so for everyone who's thinking of coming forward, they need to be thinking about how do we move forward as a group, and then people will make their decisions, but don't see each other as the enemy. And there are competent men in the wings, but the point is there are competent women, and it is, in my opinion, the turn of a region which can self-evidently supply very competent and well-qualified woman candidates. Another aspect of the last campaign was that we had what I call the East European distraction, because East Europe said it was their turn. Unfortunately, geopolitics of the world is such, I don't think it'll ever be their turn, because to find an East European that the West agrees on and Russia agrees, it's very, very difficult. But I don't think that's impossible with Latin America at all. It's just a different dynamic. But that was a distraction, and it may be a distraction that's raised again, because they will say there's never been an East European Secretary General, but I don't think there can be. But the more the debate is diverted around that, the more you're not, focusing on what could be possible.
Susana, let me turn to you. The group of women leaders has done some brilliant, if a little bit depressing work on shining a light on just how bad women's representation has been, I think, across the board in multilateral spaces. So maybe you could tell us just a little bit more about those findings, but also really how we can change this big picture.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And thanks for inviting me. I will want to add something to what you said about Helen. You had a long list of things that she has done and she's doing. You miss co-founder of GWL Voices. Yes. Helen, Irina, and I co-founded this organization, which now has close to 80 women. And we did it precisely for the reasons that Helen discussed in her last comment. We got together after the deep disappointment. Each one of us was disappointed because I didn't get it, she didn't. But we got more disappointed because not a single woman was up to the task. And we knew that there were women that could do it. So we decided to work together. We established this group, GWL Voices. By the way, Flavia to my left, Flavia Australia is also a member of the group. And we did it with the intention of working in the revitalization, the strengthening of the international system, the UN and beyond, but through the lens of women. That's what makes us different from many other initiatives that work on the UN and beyond. And in doing so, we decided that we're going to be evidence-based, because that's the other thing about talking about women. Things get softy. No, this is not soft. This is hard. This is data. And one of the things we have done and has become a flagship is our report on women in multilateralism. The latest one has 54 institutions. We go through the leadership position, the leadership teams, and we have started to dig into the governance of those institutions, because that's the other interesting piece, not only to look into the secretariats, it's also to look into how member states behave. And it's a very interesting conclusion there. So in doing so, we have found that since their inception, these 54 institutions only had 13% of the time women at the helm. There were many of them, 13 of them, who never had a woman, one of them being the United Nations. And 12 of them had only once a woman. That old saying, you know, once and done, you know, we just tick the box and it's, so that led us to deeply believe that we need to first work on every single appointment that comes our way. But particularly in the case of the UN, I couldn't agree more with Helen that the fact of having a woman at helm will change the perception of the world, at least of half the world for sure, towards the significance of the United Nations. So we have launched a Madam Secretary General campaign. And we have also launched a second campaign, which speaks to member states' participation, which relates to the fact that in 79 years, only 4 times there was the president of the General Assembly, woman. So we are asking member states to add to the rotation clauses that refer to geographic rotation, a rotation between men and women, 1 year in, 1 year out. That will also make a big difference in the governance. Definitely. But what I want to say here is that as good, and I think Helen elaborated on that, so I'm not going to repeat, as good as many things happened in 2016, we need to learn from experience. And we need to remember what Einstein said, you know, it's only mankind that repeats the same things and hopes to find a different solution. We need to think this new cycle, opening our minds and questioning what is it that we have done and we should do differently. The first thing I will say is that we need to address the fact that probably the narrative needs to be updated. The glass ceiling is not a good enough narrative. So we need to address this from a different perspective of the added value of having a woman, and what it means and what represents peace and security for me is central. You know, bringing the capacity to have a different approach to peace and security. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we spoke too much to ourselves. You know, this very nice buzz in social media, you know, that's good. That won't make a difference. Again, it has been already explained. This is not a popular vote situation. It's not even a democratic process. So let's understand how to tackle it. And the third thing, and Helen referred to the need for member states to continue the engagement. I think that's critical because we need to ensure that there is a commitment by a large proportion of member states that it should be a woman. And to that end, I will say, and I'll finish here, I think we are planning to do that as GWL Voices. We need to go country by country, create a movement within country, but a movement that requests the government to publicly recognize that they support the notion of having a woman. And I think we need to do this between now and the next General Assembly. When we celebrate the 80th, I think we should have as many heads of states and governments saying, we are committed to have a woman. If we have 100, 120 member states, hopefully 183 member states saying this, I think the pressure, the peer pressure, hopefully will play some magic.
Thank you so much for that, Susana. I mean, really great to be reflecting on what we can do differently this time, and that engagement parliaments, you know, where we can, capitals, I think is absolutely crucial. I wanted to maybe just ask a very quick follow-up to you, very similar to what I asked Helen, but maybe putting it even more bluntly about really trying to ensure that women are not punished for taking strong positions. I mean, you know, one of the flaws I thought of the dialogues, as much as we were pushing for them, is you get people on stage and they want to give the answers that they want to give, that clearly the civil society and the other audience wants to hear. But that's, something progressive on climate or something on a, conflict. I mean, everyone's very diplomatic, but you know what I mean. And then you're punished for that behind the closed doors when the five that count are around the table. So I'm just sort of thinking, how is it again the answer the member states grouping that they're backing the cause of women, but also willing to back some of these policy agendas and positions, so you're not an outlier? I don't know. That's always the risk of taking a big drumbeat and engaging people everywhere. It may force people to say what they probably want to say, but maybe shouldn't. If the differential is how can I not, pass muster with the P5?
I have to be honest with you. I don't think the decision was taken based on what was said in those. I don't think so at all. Recognizing that, I think it's also important to know that you need to be mindful of your multiple audiences. The Al Jazeera exposure was great. I think we got people interested in places that never before even knew about this process. So that's very good for other reasons, even from educational reasons. But in the end, we need to be very structured, very, very clear in our minds who our final target is. And that is the Security Council, and it is the P5. Ambassador, I recognize that the role of the others is important, but if one of the P5s veto, that's it. So the P5 are at the heart. And there, I like Helen's comment about being a secretary or being a general. That's something that we always say in the UN. Clearly, there is not appetite to have the general at large. Woman general is much more challenging. But, each one of us who ran last time, we were who we were. They knew us. So it was not, and so it was not a matter of how we said things in the conversation. It was a matter of the willingness to take certain risk, quote unquote, of having a woman who will take a stance on certain issues. To me, that goes to the heart of how meaningful the UN still is. And that's part of the conversation I believe member states need to have among themselves. If we believe that the United Nations in this 21st century, the long list of issues that are of global nature needs to be meaningful, needs to be relevant, well then considering a woman can make a big difference.
Shamana, that segues quite nicely into an even blunter question that I think I can put to you. Does the SG still matter? I think there's a real, given what's being said about the state of the world, the role of the Security Council, the impact of the divided council, there is this, question, does the role matter? Will the first woman SG end up leading a diminished UN?
Thank you. You gave me the easy question. And it's quite daunting to come after women, and listening to them, I have so many thoughts, but I will try and answer this question because I'm also very glad that listening to Susana that, in a week, I will be the second woman to lead a Security Council report because we had at least one so far. So if we hadn't had that would not look good. So 8 years ago, I did our first report on the secretarial selection process, and by the beginning of 2017, I'd written 4, at which point I thought I will not be in Security Council report for this round. I thought that's it, I'm done, I've written enough about this, but here I am, and I suspect it's going to continue, but I'm very glad to be part of this again and to see this starting early. It was a bit of a scramble. I feel like it was really good. And we had an executive director who was connected in many ways to the 1.7 billion. and we watched it very closely, and there were new things. And I think as we've heard, many of those things can be improved. They were the start of the floor and not the ceiling. So to go to your question, I think the simple answer is a yes. I think that the Secretary General role matters. The current geopolitical situation, and you see this, the dynamics in the council, obviously, I think it makes the role of the Secretary General more difficult. But it doesn't mean that the role does not matter, and I think it means it matters more. Yeah, it's difficult to do the job, but the council is not, in many things, is not doing its job of maintaining peace and security. And if it's not doing that, it needs to be urged to do so. And the Secretary General, the Charter does say something about it. I think we all know Article 99, and it allows the Secretary General to do this. It says that the Secretary General will bring to the attention of the Council any matter which, in his opinion, may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security. The Charter might have to be changed a bit about quite a few things, but and it's not an article that's been used many times. I think you know that the current Secretary General Antonio Guterres used it in December last year, but before that, I think in terms of explicit usage, it was about 1979, and it was Kurt Waldheim last used it explicitly. Now, I think the question is, he used it to draw attention to the humanitarian situation in Gaza. He wrote a letter to the Council of the President on the 6th of December, invoking Article 99. The Council met on the 8th of December. They happened to also be discussing, negotiating a draft resolution, which was vetoed later that day. So that doesn't look very good for the use of Article 99 on the face of it. But when there was a sequence of events leading up to that. And, you know, there were observers who said, well, this was a little bit too late, too little. Could it have been used earlier? Would that have made a difference? I'm not sure, but I think there were questions about the idea is you should be invoking it before things get too bad rather than after that. And it's possible that it might have helped in the momentum or the impetus that led, there was a visit to the Rafah crossing, and eventually there was a resolution by the end of the year. So it may have helped, it did give it sort of greater visibility by him coming out, because it was such an unusual thing to do. But more generally, the Secretary General, part of the role that he or she in this case, I think we're talking about, should play, is also to be able to provide the council with credible information. And I think, you know, we've seen this in the form of briefings and reports. It's sometimes not as frank as members might like. He does do a monthly briefing with the council members and with the elected members separately, and I think he is more frank, apparently in that context. But think of this also in terms of the framework of conflict prevention. And I think, you know, we're talking about women SG, and maybe think about whether a woman might bring a different approach to this role. Conflict prevention is something a lot of council members come into the council saying they want to do. It's very hard to do. But the Secretary General does have a role in this, and Guterres came in, you know, wanting a surge in diplomacy for peace that has been very difficult to execute. He did have some, you know, obstacles at the start of his term, the change in the US administration, but it has not happened. But what we do see, you know, there are a few things. There's a new agenda for peace, and maybe because he didn't have his search for diplomacy and peace, there's very clear language there for the need for more conflict prevention. It talks about the underutilization of different tools referred to in Article 33 of the Charter, and I think, you know, most of you know that these are the tools like negotiation, inquiry, mediation, and these are tools that the Secretary General can use. The Pact of the Future, which I know is still being negotiated, but it's in its final stages. It doesn't go into as much detail as the new agenda for peace, but it does ask for the Secretary General, urges the Secretary General to actively use the good offices of the Secretary General and ensure that the UN is adequately equipped to lead and support mediation preventive diplomacy. The point I think here is that a future Secretary General should be looking at how to expand that role in conflict prevention. The council hasn't been very good at preventing conflict, and that's why I think somebody has to kind of help it or take it over if it's not doing it. And there are a couple of other areas like peacekeeping. There's a lot of attention being paid to that. That changes to peacekeeping. The next Secretary General will come into a situation where hopefully there's been a review, which has been asked for in the pact, and we will see what what the shape of the new peacekeeping is. But there's a role there, I think, to lead that, because the Secretary General does lead in peacekeeping or peace operations. So there's a lot to be worked out in these areas, but I think there's potential. So there's a role. Now, what I'm going to say next, I feel like I'm being a little bit because we follow the Security Council so closely. Talking about General Assembly is unusual, but I think that we have to look at the role the General Assembly can play. I feel like a little bit of a traitor because I'm about to say that if the council doesn't play its role, maybe the GA needs to take it over, and we're hearing that more and more, right? We hear that there was the handbook that has just been published by UNUCPR, and it's very good. It has some excellent examples that will remind people that the GA can play a role in peace and security. So if the council doesn't play that role, then there is another organ, which the Secretary General has a role in, that could play that. So, that role is there, and it could grow, it could be strengthened by the time the next Secretary General comes in. It can establish peacekeeping if the council chooses not to. And so, the idea of a diminished UN, I think that in many ways, if you have a surge of activity in the GA, if some of these things do sort of change in the next 2 years or so, we might see that, that it's a different UN perhaps, rather than, it may feel diminished, but hopefully it can be built up, and that there is an interesting role that could be played. Remember, in the last process for this selection, I think you all know, the GA led the way. And I feel in watching that, I know like there were many things that were not perfect, but the Security Council was forced to respond. And it doesn't like to do that, but really it had to meet the candidates. I mean, when I was doing research for the reports I did, it really was cloak and dagger. It was really hard to know who the candidates even were. I had to dig very, very hard for who the candidates were in some years. So at least we knew that. Now, I think we have sort of skirted the issue of, maybe not skirted, we have sort of said, ultimately, the decision is made by the P5. And if that system doesn't change, there will still be problems. And the whole straw polls, I know we talked about that in the last process, having it more transparent, but having it at all. I mean, there's a veto initiative. The straw poll, can we maybe have that become part of the initiative? Just putting that out there, because it's so close that I used to get these messages, but they were almost like secret messages about who voted. Everyone got the same thing, but was secret. So that has to, I feel, change. And then just lastly, a quick word, I think, about Article 100 of the Charter, which we don't talk about so much. We talk about 99 a lot. And, Article 100 talks about the Secretary General and how the staff and secretary should not be basically influenced by members. And I think there's been a push for some time with senior appointments. I say this partly because I saw that you mentioned Yvonne in your thing, and I worked with Yvonne on the last report, and yeah. So she used to, every interview I did with her, she would ask about senior appointments, and I think that's still something that's an ongoing process, and I feel that the next SG or any SG needs a strong secretariat to support their work. And that is, I think, a parallel process that should continue. So I think, my message, I suppose, is that you need to select the right Secretary General. Very strong, idea here that it should be a woman. I see no reason for that not to be the case. But I know that we had some very good women the last time, and that still didn't happen. And I think it's just all the more important during this time.
Natalie, if I may interject just very briefly to your question about the importance of the Secretary General or the non-importance. In this context of the big geopolitics blocking everything, my sense is that it's more important than ever. Because the Secretary General is the one to call and say, these are the issues. It's a very risky proposition, of course. But that's why you run to be Secretary General and you become Secretary General. So I will argue is the significance of the role of the Secretary General is stronger today than it was in any other time in the past, given the circumstances.
Being devil's advocate maybe a little bit, but precisely to get those kind of clear answers, because I think it is a question that's asked. And one of the other things I was thinking about also is the space of the Secretary General to connect with other parts of the multilateral system. That's something that we talk about all the time, but before we can create processes and so on, that role could do that. I want everyone to think of some questions. We're going to take one round of 4 questions, but while you're doing that, I just wanted to
keep your
ask you a follow-up question as well, like I did with everyone. So I think there's different elements of this selection process. I think the transparency can help around things like senior appointments. We've seen that it's only been actually campaigning and shining a light on some of these deals that has made, to some extent, a tiny difference. That is something that the Secretary General can play a role in, and transforming also the makeup of the leadership would be huge. But of course, there's space for transparency. There should be closed doors discussions as well. It's a member state appointment. It's a security, we respect that. What would you say could be done to make the process better, given that it is a security council?
For appointments or for the SG?
For the SG role in particular, if you're looking at the process side, we've argued for the single longer term, which tears my heart in two, because why shouldn't a woman have a shorter term? But I do think that that could be something. But is there something you would say on the process side could help in a little way?
I think the strongholds, that whole process needs to be, I mean, if it can't be changed, it needs to be much more transparent. But I know, the purpose of having it is to test, right? It's so that you don't actually have the veto at the end, because you test it until you get to a point where there's agreement. So it's a little bit tricky, but I think that still feels like there's something hidden going on. And being able to understand the process better. I think that the way the candidates and the candidates here who know this better, the way you met the Security Council was a bit also a 1 hour meeting. I think that should change as well. If you really want to understand what the candidate is like, I'm not sure having tea for 1 hour is going to do it. It was tea sometimes.
The most uncomfortable tea.
Yeah.
Questions from, do you want to stick your hands up and we'll take them all at once?
Thank you. My name is Stephen Blamoni with the Coalition for the UN. I agree with the points raised by the panelists. I just wanted to bring to your attention a situation where, so the points raised in favor of the next Secretary General should come from a particular region. When I was in Nairobi for the UN Civil Society conference, there were some people who were saying from the GWL region, they always feel that part of the GWL region, their voices are sidelined. And I think Helen Clark right now talked about, at this time, I think from a geographic region, in particular from Latin America, how then would you assure the GWL candidates from the Caribbean that it does not have to be particularly from one particular region, but as GWL and also maintaining the same standard you said, a strong candidates merit-based in the geographic region.
No, you're right. It's GWL's turn, and GWL encompasses Latin America and the Caribbean. We haven't seen Caribbean candidates come forward in the past. I guess I don't want to even speculate on what the internal discussion in GWL might be between the CARICOM countries and the other countries and the regions. That's something they would have to determine. I mean, the reality is there's quite a lot of Caribbean states. They're small states, so numerically they're quite strong in GWL. But if it's a region's turn, then it's probably unlikely the region's going to support one candidate. There'll be a lot of candidates from the region. So in that sense, it's all on for whoever can muster the most support around the world's regions and who is causing the least offence to P5.
Thanks for the question. Thanks for being our first male speaker. We're the opposite of the GA. Can we take 1, 2, 3, 4? Can we just take all the questions and then have a round of answers?
Hi, so Jean Krasno, and 8 years ago, I was leading Woman SG, which was a campaign to elect a woman Secretary General. And, you know, we struggled with the same questions on the region and then on the strength of the candidates, you know, how strong are they? When Boutros Ghali was first nominated and then Kofi Annan, the Africa group said, if you don't give us an African, we're going to vote against it, and that will stop any approval by the GA because they're a big group, you know, 54 members. And that made an impression on the Security Council. So they you know, nominated Africans. In terms of a strong leader, we need a strong leader, but the P5 want a malleable leader. And, you know, you can't survive a nomination without, you know, the agreement of the P5. Oddly enough, with Kofi Annan, Madeleine Albright loved Kofi Annan because he was pro-African. And then she really supported him through the process, you know, historically. But so it can happen, but you have to get advocates. And I noticed that the strongest people who were candidates last time didn't make it because of that perception of the P5. So that's something we all have to work on. I liked your idea of having strong policies and focusing on advocacy for really good policies that I think will appeal to the P5. But we have to work on that issue.
Thank you. Marie Bierman, World Future Council, and I've just learned about this wonderful campaign, and I'm reading this and thinking to myself, you know, a fair and inclusive process, and I've just learned that 8 years ago you tried to go through this process.
Yeah.
So possibly this campaign should be bolder in asking for a female Secretary General and really name it and, you know, put it out there. And I have no real experience about all the protocols and so on, but I think it's time to really say that it is time. So.
Oh, sorry, I think I saw you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Mintu Pham. Having worked with the previous Secretary General, who's already mentioned here, Kofi Annan, I think one of his strengths was that he was so soft-spoken. I think that probably helped his perception among the P5 as to what he might be like as a Secretary General. And then when he became Secretary General, he was much more assertive, especially knowing the roles and authority that a Secretary General should have in that role vis-a-vis the member states. And I think was able to then know what the kind of governance differences between what member states should be able to do and what a Secretary General should be able to do, so that he could push back when he needed to. And I think now what we've seen is an erosion in a way of the authority of the Secretary General, or at least as it's perceived by the member states as to what a Secretary General can do. And even in this Summit of the Future process, you see the Secretary General asking for permission from member states for things that are fully within now only his authority to do, versus what actually, you know, he should have been doing anyway without having to ask them. And, you know, I like to say, be careful what you wish for or what you ask for, because you might get an answer you don't want. So just to Helen Clark's point about Secretary versus General, I wonder whether a strong female candidate needs to sort of take a leaf from that playbook of being really, really nice and maybe gently spoken, at least in terms of the sort of process and getting to, you know, the selection or getting through the selection, versus then what your stance might be once you become, you know, if you get through it, Secretary General. And so that kind of I think this is a challenge for all women leaders, being nice and assertive so that you can be listened to and have that authority, but also be able to get through whatever kind of biases are there. So I just wanted to pose that in terms of how we might think about the approach of a female candidate in the period before becoming Secretary General and then after.
Be smart, it would kill me inside to do that. There's lots of comments that if you're all very brief and if there are questions as well, I've got Volker, you, and then Hans, please squeeze you in as well.
Thank you, Natalie. Volker Lehmann, FS New York. I've also been involved in the previous campaign called 1 for 7 billion. Back then, I've been an advocate, a proponent of a female SG then, and I still am, but I feel that we have to ask for more. And let me try to explain why I think we have to ask for more, because I feel we have a number of examples where outstanding women leaders lead international organizations, but they are handed an impossible job. And to my mind comes, for instance, the example that I would like not to see happen again with the UN of the WTO, where the former Nigerian foreign minister, finance minister is now the head of the WTO, but basically leading an organization that is completely politically stifled for all kinds of geopolitical reasons, has very little potential to actually be the leader in this organization that she could be. Similar thing comes to mind when I look at the OSCE, which was headed until now by Helga Schmidt, the first woman who led the OSCE. But what was her hand? What could she do when the invasion of Ukraine by Russia happened? The OSCE was completely sidelined. So another example of an organization led by a highly competent woman leader, but the organization was basically politically made irrelevant. So let us think about, what shall we do about the UN, which we all know is an identity crisis in its own way. When it's time to select the next Secretary General, what to ask in addition to the next Secretary General being a woman. And I would suggest, and we had that discussion before, think about the one-term prolonged term for the next Madam Secretary General, because I think it will make her stronger. And I know immediately the argument against it. Now it is the time for a woman Secretary. Now it's the time for a woman Secretary General, and just now you want to make this shorter. No, I think this is the wrong way of looking at it, because I think it would make Madam Secretary General the stronger Secretary General. And I stop now. Helga Schmidt, the woman who I just mentioned, who was the head of the OSCE, will be the 80th president, most likely, of the UN General Assembly, and we should work with her on the proposals for women Secretary General and a one-term, longer term only, starting at the 80th presidency. Thank you.
Thanks, Volker. A very quick comment or question?
Two very quick questions. Rebecca Shute, Executive Director of Citizens for Global Solutions, and my organization is a little bit younger than the UN. We were founded in 1947, but I was its first Executive Director, who is a woman. So I sympathize a little bit with the issues that are being discussed today. So two quick questions. Number one, in the last few years, there was a fairly rigorous process to reform and redefine the criteria for nomination and election of judges to the International Criminal Court, so that there was some, if not objective, at least definable criteria for their fitness for duty. Of course, there are gender and geographic considerations in the makeup of that court. And civil society played a very important role in working with member states to help articulate those criteria, particularly the Open Society Justice Initiative. Is there anything that can you learn from those processes that can be applied to the nomination election of the Secretary General? And secondly, my first career was in democratic development, working on women's political participation. One thing, including in Eastern Europe, and one thing that we found was that even when there were women in the top jobs and at the grassroots level, what was missing was everything in between. So all of those interstitial roles, all of those line managers, all of those different bureaus and departments within the UN system, how do we support women, not just at the top, not just at the bottom, breaking their way in as interns or as entry level, but throughout the course of the career? Thank you.
Very quick to final comment.
Thank you, Dr. Flavia Buster, also associated with Global Women Leader Voices. Mine is a question to the audience, not to my fellow colleagues, but is thinking what you were saying in terms of being bold and creating a frame that is absolutely irrefutable. Isn't this not the time that instead of asking for the next Secretary General to be a woman, we say absolutely not another man? Because at this point in time, for example, I see the Interparliamentary Union. They did that, and they had a slate of candidates for the last election of the IPU president. Only female candidates were presented by the different parliaments, and of course, the result was a woman female president. Because I think we need to be aggressive, and this is what Helen, you said, that there will be that man ready in the room or on the outside room to come in when the disagreements come. But I think a role of civil society maybe would be to be, no, this would be unacceptable now, and see whether that kind of pressure can get us a little bit further. I hope that was short.
Thank you. Mariana Leoni, I'm director of the GWL campaign. So I have two brief comments. One goes a little bit in line with that. Our campaign focuses on achieving gender parity in international bodies that deal with justice, from the international courts, the treaty bodies, the special procedures at the Human Rights Council, and so on. And we've seen in the years that we've been campaigning, which procedures are similar in the way that they're opaque, and nomination by states are not necessarily always transparent, and there's exchanges of vote that occur behind doors. That there has been small progress in setting guidelines at different levels, and some have been pushed by civil society. And I was wondering whether there could be something to either systematize and learn from some of those experiences. And the other thing is, I very much agree with what Susana was saying, that perhaps it's just the glass ceiling at this moment is not enough. It's also about discussing why this is important, but I also think it's also discussing about the qualities that the next Secretary General needs to have. And I've seen a lot of that. And I think that's a very important conversation sitting from the civil society side that we need to bring to the table. So it's, it needs to be a woman, absolutely not another man. What kind of woman do we need? What kind of platform and what kind of issues need to come to the conversation? And I also would like to hear a little bit more about how you think, with the vision, political vision that you have, that we can help have that conversation in a way that helps still have the call for a woman to be on the place.
Lots of things on the table, little time. I know you have to go as well. So maybe we can take just a couple of minutes from each panelist, respond to what everyone heard about policy positions, being bold, soft-spoken, single term, learning from other processes. Pick what you'd like to say as your final thought.
I think that bold leadership is needed, and we need to start at who is chairing the ad hoc working group on the revitalization of journals. What happened is that whoever chairs that process can put forth a very strong draft or a very weak draft. What we saw in when with the last two co-facilitators, they put forth the strongest draft we ever seen on revitalization. And now we have a demand from the General Assembly for the candidates to disclose their financing. So now the General Assembly is requesting the candidates, where's the money coming from to support your trips? And you need to disclose that. But it depends on who's seated at that chair. If you have a couple of PRs who are afraid to present a strong document, the work is on the experts. And discussion on experts, we have brilliant experts there, especially from ACT, that have been doing this process for a long time and understand how to do the alliances. Creating alliances with ACT, CANS, hopefully with a NAP, we can probably tip the balance a little bit. And I think that more importantly about on your point, me too, of being, I think it's the leadership style. What could make a huge difference. And as I said before, it's not about just, it's about building bridges. And what the world needs right here, right now, is inspired, positive leadership that can bridge the divide between the North and the South, the East and the West, and create the feeling that this DSG is working in good faith. And I think the principle of good faith is paramount to this election. We need someone who will embody the feelings that the UN is still relevant. But if we want the UN to thrive, we must bring the best. Not only the best candidates, but the best diplomats to New York. And we must select the best in this election, and I'm certain that we have the women to be appointed to the job.
Thanks so much. And then feel free if you have to leave at any time.
A few minutes.
Helen.
I think it would be useful to encourage a debate about what the challenges are that the next Secretary General is going to have to face, and not just the existential crises or the, scanning over the horizon at where current conflicts are going and where others might emerge. It's also, scoping the geopolitical context. In other words, a debate about what is this person going to confront, and then what kind of skills need to be brought to that. I think that would be actually quite a rich debate to have. My second response was going to be around how the women present. I think we were all as nice as we could be. But I remember one senior ambassador saying to me, "Your strength is your weakness." And in the end, you can't be something you're not.
Yeah.
You can't present as a sort of simpering, that's not you, right? So you have to present as someone who can do the job. And if they're put off by that, well, obviously, they're not going to go for someone who can do the job. But I think authenticity is everything. And you want to come out of a campaign with some self-respect as well, that you put yourself forward in the way that you would want to be remembered as well, and not as something that you weren't. It's better to lose honorably than to win on a false case.
I think trust is the big issue these days. So whoever is chosen needs to have the trust, needs to be entrusted. And you cannot be entrusted if you are not trusted to yourself. So, that's as simple as that. 2 comments. I think the issue of one single longer term is a very important discussion. I think this goes to some of the things that can be done from the GA. I also believe, and I know this was tried, the notion of having more than one candidate put forward by the Security Council could be another way to unlock some of the tensions within the Security Council and then have the General Assembly take a decision with options. So those 2 things. The last comment is on authenticity. And I work with coffee, and it was just what you described. It was coffee. It was not that he was making it up. It was him. I could never be coffee. And if I pretended to be, it would be just wrong. So how you speak truth to power? Of course, you need to be conscious of the environment and the respect, and I think we all are. But in the end, we are who we are. Last very brief comment. The Secretary General needs to be ready to ask for forgiveness instead of asking for permission. You just need to choose the right moment. You don't do that every day. But when you do it, it has to make a difference. And that to me is fundamental.
Shamala.
Okay. So I think that I agree with that the term limit, the idea of a shorter term is something to look at. It does feel wrong to do it a woman SG sort of idea, but I know they've looked at the idea of 7 years instead of 5, something in between 5 and 10, but I think that should be maybe reopened. The point about like the platform, what type of woman the issues, I think that's important. It should not be just we want a woman, any woman, and I know that, but I think the way to do it is, as you said, the data, to show sort of certain things. And maybe my last point is that, and I still believe, I think, in the elected members. I know the P5 are, sort of going to control a lot of things, but there are the 10 elected members, and I would say that, so if I've calculated right, my colleagues are here can tell me if I'm wrong, I believe that Korea ROK will have the presidency next September. If you want the letter to go out, then, you start working with them early. Unfortunately, after ROK is another R. So, certain things might want to be right, but I remember working with the elected members in 2016, 17, and they were so unaware of the process. So one of the first things is to get them to understand, and it's much, much better because there's so much written about it now, but to get them already thinking about this. And I know some of them are, and, I think that might bring, there might be a momentum there that you need. So.
Thank you all so much for being so generous with your time. Frank, I think, with your answers. Thanks so much to my 1 for 7 billion, 1 for 8, I'm stuck in the past, 1 for 8 billion colleagues. Thank you to BIC for being the only place in the area we can afford and for hosting us.
It's free.
Precisely. Please do check out the 1 for 8 billion.org website. While you're there, you can sign up to join the movement. Basically, we're calling for the process to be fair, transparent, inclusive, feminist, and rigorous. We want a timeline. We want a public call for nominations. We want a list of selection criteria. We want people, the General Assembly and member states, but also the public to be updated on the process, candidates to be able to present their vision and goals openly, even though other forums will also be needed. We do want those dialogues. We would love an end to backroom deals and figuring out how to make that possible. We do think we need to have a conversation on a single term of office. I think 7 great years would be better than 10 compromised years. And finally, we would love the GA to have a real choice, not just rubber stamping a candidate potentially to, or at least sending them back if it's a man. And I think the men are, they're not just waiting in the wings, they're already there. You can also write to your government, we hope, and urge them to nominate women. And of course, if you're representing a member state today, we hope you're taking note. Final note, we are looking for funding to support our work. We know from last time round that it's crucial to start now. We know we can make a difference. We did it before, it wasn't perfect, but we did open the door a crack. And with your help, I think we can do it again. So thanks so much to all of you for coming, and thanks again to the panel.